Many thanks for choosing us. More than 70,000 students will call at the various colleges of education spread across the country Saturday, the 8th of January 2022. It will be the first time such a huge number is congregating since the colleges were upgraded 4 years ago. Degree students in level 100, 200, 300 and 400 will all be in session when school reopens this week after the 2-year diploma programs were phased out. As demand for teacher education more than doubled since 2016, will the existing infrastructure be able to cope with the huge numbers? That's our conversation today. We've put together all stakeholders connected to this for the conversation. I'll be joined shortly by Franklin Kujo, who is president of Imani Africa, Dr. Suleimana Idris, who is president of the Conference of Principals of Colleges of Education, PRINCOF, Kwesi Kwating, who is spokesperson for the Ministry of Education, Larry Agbado, who is editor of the Colleges of Education Weekly Journal, and also Dembe Abdul Manan, who is National President, Teacher Trainees Association of Ghana. I'm grateful for your time, gentlemen.
Happy New Year.
Many happy returns to all of you. Now, there are a total of 46 colleges of education spread across the country. They are to produce teachers to handle education in the country's basic and secondary schools. This is how important these colleges are to the nation's development. Before we go into the conversation, let's take a look at the scope of the issue we're dealing with. And there you have it. You look at the years from 2016 to 2017, and then you look at the red line, that is the number of students that applied to be given admission in the colleges of education. So you look at, that's the total number of applications received. In between 2016 and 2017, you had 42,873. Now, within the 42,873, only 18,911 were given admission. Now you go to 2017 to 2018, and then 43,795 students applied for admission. Out of this, 16,558 were given admission. 2018-2019 academic year, 56,000. So you see how the gap keeps widening from 2016 all up to 2021. You see that the gap keeps widening by the year. Now in 2018 to 2019, you find 56,044 people applying for admission. Out of this 56,044, you have 18,125 only getting admission. Now you fast forward to 2019-2020 academic year, the gap widens again. 72,019 people apply for admission, and out of that you get only 20,337 being admitted. Between 2020 and 2021, 90,753 actually applied for admission, and 26,888 out of the number were given admission. I mean, this is how the situation. So if you look at the total number of students added since 2016, it comes to 9,506. That is the number of students we've had, the increase in population we've had. Now let's look at applications received between 2016 and 2021. It has increased by 111.68%. And if you look at the admission, so this is the number of people who have applied for admission versus the number of people who have gotten. So admissions offered between 2016 and 2021 has increased by 42.18% out of 111.68%. I mean, this gap is very wide. And you ask yourself, how did we get here? Now, let's look at what will happen on campus this January. We have level 100 going to level 200. We have 21,963 of them. And then you have level 200 who are now going to level 300, 16,258 of them. Level 300 students who are going to level 400, you have 15,292 of them. This gives you a total of 53,513, plus those who will be going for level 100 this year. All of them are supposed to be on campus this January when school reopens. Where are the infrastructure? I mean, where are the classrooms where these students will be put there for them to be giving the kind of education that they deserve? That's the conversation we're going to be having this afternoon. Let me start with the Vice President of Prinkov. And the first question I want to put to you, Vice President, is for you to paint that picture for us. What does this whole analysis, the gap we're talking about, what is the situation like? Kindly unmute for me, Dr. Suleimana.
Swelling up. What that means is that with the 3-year diploma, we're managing with just 3 cohorts. And even with that, that was a problem. Accommodation was a big problem. That is not adequate to prepare them for the kind of teachers we want to produce in the 21st century. And I think that if nothing is done seriously about the infrastructure deficit,
Plan is, Kwesi, why are we here in the first place, and what's the plan to take us out of this place? Hello, Kwesi.
And when we do that, we are able to, of course, confront them and address them accordingly. Yes, generally, even beyond the tertiary level, the problem of infrastructure has been systemic. It's been with us since and it's been in the educational system. For instance, if you recall, just 2017, Get Fund did an infrastructure audit, and they realized that there were about 3,897 ongoing projects that you can call them abandoned, because I mean these were projects that from the year 2000 up to the year 2017 have been left at various stages of completion. And then as of now, of course, the ministry in collaboration with Get Fund, for instance, has been able to complete about 1,001 of them. If you look at the statistics, out of this 1,001, a number of them found themselves at the tertiary stage, because you have about 571 at the basic level, about 346 at the secondary level, and around 84 of them at the tertiary level, of which includes classrooms, dormitories, hostels, dining facilities, administration, and library block, and of course other facilities. And also cumulatively, Get Fund alone, I mean, through their intervention, for instance, out of this abandoned projects in quote, probably have been able to do about 1,001 of them. Of course, I mean, what it means is that, or the principle that we want to establish is that Get Fund has been able to contribute their quota. If you go to the colleges of education, for instance, you have some of the institutions using their IGF, that is their internally generated funds, to be able to also do some constructions. But the challenge, and of course, I mean, we have to admit that there is still infrastructure deficit that as a ministry or as a country we have to face. If you recall, just last November, GTech, in consultation or in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, I mean, held an infrastructure forum at KNUST in Kumasi, of course, to harness the private sector to also come on board. Just last week alone, the GTech, of course, in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, has opened the tender for the construction of about 400 capacity hostels in all the 46 colleges of education. So from the side of the ministry, yes, the challenge is there. And I mean, the challenge is not even only a challenge that is synonymous with the tertiary institutions alone. If we come to the secondary level, we have a challenge of infrastructure. If we come to the primary level, there is infrastructure deficits. I mean, recently, Joy, you heard the conversation about schools under trees, and the fact that VACO Foundation is embarking on a journey to do about 5,000 of them. So yes, admittedly, that challenge is there. And of course, I mean, if you look at the fact that, I mean, the free senior secondary school certainly, I mean, increased the numbers, and there was a surge. And then there was that innovative response of double track. Oh, I mean, it wouldn't end there. As soon as you graduate more, then a cause for that obvious intervention also going forward, even at the tertiary level. And so holistically, it has been a systemic challenge that we are addressing. Get Fund has been able to do it, but the schools have also been also doing their bit. Recently, government has also contributed to helping most of the schools to also complete some of their infrastructure that they started with their own IGFs. Like I said, just last week, tenders were open for the construction of at least 400 capacity hostels in each of the colleges of education. So yes, we will continue to address the challenges with the infrastructure. But I mean, certainly, at some point, we may have to also innovatively create a system that will allow everybody the opportunity to also have education. So that, like the vice president of PRINCOP said, wouldn't how do you call it, sacrifice also quality at the altar of saying that we just necessarily want to produce graduates. We have been having a conversation about increasing our gross tertiary enrollment ratio, but by 2030 increasing up to 40%. Certainly, it is not an event; it's obviously a process. The process will require that you open up space at the secondary level, which ultimately will mean that even at the tertiary level, you have to give the opportunity for people to go. Then you are confronted with the challenge of infrastructure. What do? You do not complain, you address them, and as I speak with you, Get Fund is really working to make sure that the infrastructure deficit that we are having, not even only at the tertiary level, but we'll be able to complete a lot of the projects. Like I said, when Get funded their audit in 2017, there were about 3,897 ongoing projects that had been left at various stages of completion. Out of this, 1,001 were done just as at last year, and which means that there were about 2,896 that were supposed to be completed. And these are projects that Get Fund is still working on them to be able to complete a lot of them, outside even those new tenders that has been open. So from the side of the ministry, we are very open for especially partnership, especially from the private sector, so that we'll be able to address the
basically trying to look at the new forms of education, as it were, trying to understand. I think about 7 years ago, we put up a whole committee of eminent educators as well as business people together to sort of direct the new thinking for education in this country. And I recall the conversation about teacher education came up. And at the time, I think President Mahama was trying to the point he's making is that, of course, education has always been in constant crisis for several decades now, solely due to the political management of education in this. Where therefore you'll be shortchanged when it comes to finding the resources. As I've heard, that policy is not going to be put on ice, which is a very sensible thing to do. But otherwise, that clearly this is not going to lead us to any sustainable path. Part of the point I also want to make is that it looks to me that the whole management is well respected. So what has been created is not is it was man-made. That's the point I'm making, and it's good we realize that we need to shy away or stay away from the problems. I want to.
And the development of the colleges, do you think that the payment of these allowances has had an effect on infrastructure development for the colleges?
Oh, without a doubt, it definitely has had. I mean, when you ask yourself, why is it being stopped now? It's not because it's no longer palatable to do so. It's because we've reached a crescendo. We've reached a point where clearly we cannot continue spending on goods and services which are not necessarily needed. I mean, how do you feed people who are attending school and at the same time give them an allowance as well. I do not think that that is what should be done. So had it not had an impact, I don't think it would have been suggested for some sort of an abeyance. So that's why I make the point that part of this problem has always been political and not necessarily NPP. It's always been up and down, and it's not helped us. If we had stopped this in 2016.
Of course, admittedly, there's been some delays in the release of some measures to them, but recently some backlog or some arrests were also there. And I think it will be, even though my senior brother frankly may not be wrong, I think that it's simplistic to suggest that some way somehow when the allowances are not paid, we'll be able to solve our infrastructure deficit. That for me is not accurate. There can still be allowance and there can still be an innovative way of solving our infrastructure deficit.
One of scrap it.
The good model of doing that is bringing in the private sector. And at the end of the day, what it means is that we're also creating jobs for the private sector, and I think we also have to. And of course, Get Fund has also been doing their business.
So I just want you to answer this for me. You are not scrapping the teacher training allowance.
That's why I said that if you refer to my statement, I mean, I signed that statement on the 31st of December. You know, there were such rumors in town where, of course, I mean, the politics of it, you saw our friends also, I mean, heightening it and also a lot of publications and sharing on other online platforms. Then we came out clearly on that as far as the ministry is concerned, there has been no such conversation on the scrapping of allowance. And as of now, the allowances are being paid. That's why I said that even recently, some of the budgets were even facilitated to the beneficiaries of the training students. So the allowances on authority categorically has not been scrapped, and we do not have such a conversation. And the point I want to declare is that we shouldn't premise our infrastructure deficit or challenges on the fact that the allowances are big. I mean, that is very simplistic to say. Allowances can still be, of course, I mean, we can have such conversation other day, but to just suggest that we have infrastructure deficit because allowances are being paid, then what also happens to at the basic level? We are not paying allowances. What happens also at the secondary level? We are not paying allowances.
Mr. Kwacha, I don't think I've suggested that. The point I made was that partly the reasons why we are in this mess is essentially because we are reordering resources away from significant should I call it investment? And like you said, it's an age-old problem. It's not new. But the point ought to be made clearly that if you did your own assessment and probably spoke to the schools, I'm pretty sure that you find these train of thought that look, this whole arrangement of paying allowances to people who are being the promise. But I think it is important you also take a good look at the policy. And if it is the case that you now want to shift it, like you're suggesting, to the private sector, which is the natural thing to do, let people take loans and pay back. I mean, that's what we all did when we were in the university. I don't see why I should be feeding grown-up people and at the same time giving them money for wanting to be teachers. I don't think that is a good use of our money. So while I appreciate that there's no statement of such nature, and I'm sorry, I read some of those statements as well, intending to either scrap or reorder the payment of these allowances to the private means, which would be the natural, very good way of doing things, by the way. So if you haven't considered it, please consider it. And it's not
All right, so I think that point has been made. But I want to bring in Larry. Larry, you are an editor for the journal, Colleges of Education Weekly Journal. And for the entire 2021, students across the 46 public colleges of education have been in school for only 3 months. I mean, what is the situation on the ground, and what actually accounted for students being in school for only 3 months in 2021?
All right, thank you very much, Aisha. And I must commend your news desk for putting together such. The earlier we put politics, or we take politics out of issues affecting colleges of education, the better for us as a country. When you go to all the colleges of education across the country, in the last 4 years, you observe that there's little work ongoing with regards to infrastructure. The infrastructure you see across all the colleges, then you probably observe that it's the management of those colleges that have, in their own wisdom, using their IGF to mount such infrastructure. But you wouldn't see a government project ongoing now. Government has been they've done so well with the payment of the training allowance for the past 4 years. They did so well with that. Yes, they promised the students they're going to pay, and they did that exactly. But when we stand right now, the state of affairs in the colleges, when you take issues of allowance and you take issues of infrastructure, you realize that if you want to address these issues in terms of priority, infrastructure should come first. We have about over 70,000 applicants applying to the colleges of education, and they will pick only 16,000. When you pick them, you have to pay them allowance. But if you're able to put that allowance aside, use such monies to put up infrastructure in the colleges, no matter the number that applies, we'll surely be able to pick them. We'll be able to admit them. The current ratio of teacher-students in our basic schools is not the best. You go to some schools, and from primary 1 to primary 6, you have just a teacher that is handling the whole school. And we have people who are applying to these institutions to be trained as teachers, and we have factors or other barriers that are preventing them. So the situation on the ground, last year, I think they came to campus in February or so, and left campus around March, April, to complete a semester that they started in 2019. Aside that, there was no academic work for the entire 2020. As to why there was no academic work, I think my big brother, Mr. Kwartin, will be the best person to tell us why there was no academic work. But it's really a serious issue that for a whole academic year or for a whole year running, there was no serious academic work in institutions that train our basic schools. I think it's a serious issue we should be looking at as a country.
Thankfully, Kwesi Kwartin is here. Kwesi, can you explain to us what has happened?
Okay, I think the first reaction is he made a point that some way, somehow, there is a quota system because government wants to, or government probably is capable of paying to a certain number of students or applicants. Maybe so we should scrap the allowances so that we give everybody the opportunity. You see, it defeats the whole idea about application system. Even if you go to our universities today, there are a number of applications. Not everybody that is able to get to the university, because at the end of the day, there is a base or there is a criteria for selecting, candidates in the university. So is the suggestion also that because the universities hold on. Even at the universities, it's not everybody that applies to the university that gets admission. In the university, we do not pay allowance. So what is he trying to sometimes they may have to go rewrite the exams and correct their results or put their results in shape before they get to the university. So the fact that a number of students probably did not get an opportunity to be in the tertiary institution or in the college of education does not necessarily mean that it's because government cannot pay the allowances. That's why government is a quota system. There has not been any quota system anywhere. And then that should be said.
But what accounted for the students?
That's what you are suggesting.
No.
Okay, Kwesi, I'm asking.
Suggested.
Okay, Kwesi, I'm asking what accounted for the students being in school for just 3 months.
The students are in school for just 3 months.
Yes.
Of course, they operate based on academic. No, you see, the point is that students have always operated on how do you call it? On a certain time set. For instance, let me give you a scenario. If you look at even at the secondary level, for instance, I mean, there was this whole rumor and speculations about the fact that the time frame was short and whatever. But at the end of the day, if you look at the contact hours, most of the contact hours were even longer than the previous. So again, it's simplistic to say that students are what has been the usual semester base. The usual semester system has always been between 3 and 3.5 months. So I do not really get it. Again, don't let us also forget the fact that the whole of 2019, essentially, school academic activities were not ongoing. 2020, most of the academic calendars changed. So I do not get this whole strenuous attempt to create an impression as though, because in any event, last year, the training college or the college of education still had their normal system, which was a 3-year batch. It is only this year that we'll be getting the new entrance. So, I mean, what is the link? To create an impression or to suggest that
we need to correct this. I never said government introduced a quota system. In fact, if you check the figures from 20.
No, but that was. I mean, you don't necessarily have to. No, you don't necessarily have to.
You realize that
I'm coming. You don't necessarily have to make it express. It's an implied.
Okay, so
no.
So Larry, let Kwesi make his point. Then you can come in with that explanation.
Okay.
So I am saying that in 2020, because of what we inherited in 2019, academic calendar all over changed. If you look at BEC, we didn't write BEC in the usual time. WASI, we didn't write WASI in the usual time. At the secondary level, the academic calendar was a bit distorted. At all levels. Today, next year, we'll be having the universities going to school, in January. I think Legon is around 6 January or so. It used to be September. So why are we also not asking? And we cannot pretend that there was distortion in academic calendar and a lot has to change before we probably come back to normal time. So for me, that's what I'm saying, that it is not as though we do not have challenges. Yes, we do have challenges, but we have to discuss those challenges from a dispassionate point of view and probably from an honest point of view. So, I mean, to create an impression that, well, I mean, because of teacher training allowances, government do not admit everybody, that probably applies. Certainly, on a general principle and the premise is that it is not everybody that applies that even gets the opportunity to be at the schools, whether at the colleges of education or even at the university. Because certainly there is a how do you call it, a passing requirement that you have to meet before you have the opportunity to go there. So for me, I do not get this whole strenuous attempt of trying to bastardize all the challenges in our colleges of education are going to be solved. It doesn't work that way. If you look at the allowances, there are a lot of other researchers, other studies that are also making a very strong case for the allowances. We have students buying their books, buying handouts, and a lot of things that also goes into it. And so, I mean, we have to put our conversation in that proper perspective or the proper context.
Okay, so Larry, you can briefly come in with the explanation you wanted to give me. Then I can bring in Dr. Suleiman Idris. So I know Abdul Manan is on. Please give me just a minute. I'll come to you, Abdul Manan. Larry, let's hear that explanation you wanted to give.
Yeah, so if you look at the figures you projected, you realize that in 2016-2017, about 18,911 were admitted. That was 2016-2017. So I think that's under the regime of former President Mahama. Now, if you go fast forward to 2020-2021, 26,000 students were admitted. You can see the vast difference. So under no circumstance will someone see these figures and say they have introduced quota system into the, no. What I'm saying is, fine, we can still combine the payment of training teachers allowance with infrastructure. But as a country, with all these COVID implications and the rest, let's just accept the fact that we are currently in hard times. And it will be difficult doing the two at the same time. But the most pressing one now has to do with the infrastructure. If government still feels that fine, we have the capacity to continue the payment of the allowance and still go ahead and do the infrastructure to accommodate the students, no problem. But these issues are affecting the progress of the colleges, and it's worrying. But I never said quota system has been introduced into the system. No. If you look at the figures, you realize that even from 2017 up to date, the admission figures have really gone up and not rather gone down. So once the numbers have gone up, it means there's nothing like quota system into our colleges of education.
Dr. Suleiman Idris, you are the president of Prinkov. I want you to tell me what has been the normal academic calendar. What has it been like? I mean, and if you look at the 3 months for students in the whole academic year, what has it been like? And what reasons can you give for this?
Good evening to all teacher trainees across the 46 public colleges of education. And this isn't the first time we're actually having conversations about the infrastructure deficit in the colleges of education. And as it stands now, based on what the other panelists said, we should be saying that we are in a crisis when it comes to the infrastructure deficit in the colleges of education. Now, from our own point of view, you would notice that level 400 students who are supposed to start their second semester in this year 2022 would have to spend close to 9 months for just one semester, of which one semester initially was just 4 months. Within 4 months, you were done with a semester and you'd have completed and you were planning to actually take your final exam, NTC exams, and then leave college. But as it stands now, because of the infrastructure deficit in the colleges, we now have the level 400 students who would report to school after vacating in December, in June. That's about 6 months now. Just go and then sit back at home. And I mean, we ask ourselves, doing what at home? Now, these are some of the challenges we are facing. Now, shifting it to the point of view of the admissions in the colleges of education, I side with my big brother, Kwesi Kwatin, on this particular issue because listening to the statistics that was presented, you never mentioned as a result of the fact that what caused some people from being admitted into the college, what prevented some people from being admitted into the colleges. Now, times have changed. And since we are now using the B.Ed system, you would need 6 credits to be able to enter into the colleges of education. Now, even up to date, people don't know of this reality. You still have people calling around to find out whether they can come into colleges with F9, D7, E8 in core subjects like English, science, and mathematics. So when we make the analysis of the fact that some people were not admitted into the colleges, we should look into one or two things. What is actually causing the people from not being admitted? Now, another factor that we would say attests to the increase in people wanting to come into the colleges is the payment of the allowances. I must be honest on that because allowances that were introduced by the government are actually helping the teacher trainees a lot in terms of so many um, 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 how would I even put it, needs in the colleges. So when we are talking about the issue of infrastructure deficit, yes, there's a crisis. We need to look into that. Right from the beginning, we TAG have always been advocating for privatization in the colleges of education. We cannot say that in the universities today, they don't have infrastructure deficit. We can't run away from that fact. We cannot say that in the universities today, they don't have people applying and the numbers they are picking to does not tally with maybe the numbers we are talking about now. So what we should be looking at now is improving upon the infrastructure deficit in the colleges of education. Now, my whole issue or challenge I have with this whole thing is that you see the B.Ed system was introduced in 2018. Now, policymakers who saw the need for colleges to be upgraded from diploma to degree should have looked into all these things. You don't go into a policy that you want. In the process of you going into the policy, you are now amending things of the policy. It's not done that way. Once you roll out a policy, you should know that in the future, the colleges can only accommodate 2-year groups. So once the colleges can only accommodate 2-year groups, what should you have done back then in 2018? You should have started preparing for 2022, where we would have the 4-year batch on campus, and there would be pressure on the infrastructure we have in the colleges. So basically, we are in a crisis when it comes to the infrastructure deficit. But for the cancellation or the scrapping of the allowances, we as an association do not side with such opinions when it comes to such discussions. Thank you very much.
Remember, you gave government a 3-week ultimatum in October to pay all arrears of the trainee teachers' allowance. What's the current situation now?
Yes. After the ultimatum was given, we still had broader stakeholder engagement with the government to ensure that the allowances were going to be paid. That is the arrears. And as it stands now, within just 2 weeks ago, the government was able to honor its promise of paying 2 months of the allowances. And we are still in touch with the necessary stakeholders to ensure that the other 4 months arrears we are having are paid. Now, this is one thing that we do not look into. The fact that the allowances we have in the colleges are the same money the principals use to feed the students. And thank God that we have the National Vice President of PRINCOF in this panel. He would attest to the fact that when there was a time that we expected the students in the colleges of education
and find out, I mean, how would you advise government to go about this teacher training allowance, considering the political nature of it?
Well, I guess the question would be whether it is impacting on anything significant at all. I would have thought that there will be some papers, review papers written by now on the impact that the allowances have had on teacher education training in the country, and the impact from the standpoint of the taxpayer, not from the standpoint of the person spending the tax, because it is important to also make the point that often policymakers are obviously interested in whatever they have proposed, but then they do not tend to normally look at the impact that we all think we can do without. So my advice would have been, look, at this juncture, we cannot be told that it is not having any impact at all. There is an impact, and there are pathways to ensuring that this is sustained. And the only pathway we all know now is through the students' loan, is it a trust or something, the private sector approach. If it is the case, as my good brother suggested, that the allowances had been helpful, then it helps everybody. And I do not want the government to attract that bill on the books, which consequently affects the infrastructure rollout in not just the colleges of education, but across all other institutions that government has a hand in. So my advice clearly would be what everybody else seems to be suggesting. Now let's move all these students onto the Students Loans Trust Program so that they can also see that there's some responsibility in being supported in order to get education. It's not as if they are doing this, it's not free. The education is not free. It comes back to help the country, but they are always paid for their services as well. And so we should not entertain the thought that these things, once they are reordered in a way that is being suggested, then all of a sudden hell will break loose. But I can understand the difficulty. Communicating that again back to the electorate will look as if, well, it's some sort of a slap in the face. But it's bolder decisions that distinguish leaders from their followers. And I know Mr. Kwatin is a good leader, and his boss, the minister, is also a good leader. And I know when they have a chance, they'll change that policy immediately.
We definitely need solutions, and definitely there are two issues here: the infrastructure deficit and the teacher training allowance. And the question is whether to scrap it, or, I mean, what should we do to actually solve these issues affecting the teacher trainee institutions. Now, Abdul Manan, I want to bring you in here. To ensure a smooth running of the colleges of education and teacher education as a whole, would you and your members accept for government to stop the payment of allowances? Okay, so I'm told Abdul Manan is not on. We'll try and bring him back, but maybe I can put the same question to Larry. Larry, what do you think can be done to address the infrastructure deficit?
I think within last year, government took steps to engage the Ghana Real Estate Development Association to see how best they can possibly partner with them to build hostel facilities on the various campuses. I don't know how far that has gone. The entire infrastructure project is not being done by the institution or government alone. You have private developers who have come in to build hostels and are renting to these students. If the students are taking allowance and they can afford hostels at very affordable rates, why not? At least that will even allow for the colleges to also take in more students. And the Prinkoff vice president will attest to this, that look, the more students they get, the more money they also get in running the colleges. So it's time government opens up the system for the private sector to also come in. That is, if they still want to continue with the payment of the allowance, if there's enough money at the country for us to continue with the payment of the allowance, then they should open up the system for the private sector to also come in to support. But if we still want to go the same way, then I think we're going to have a challenge, because this particular year, we're going to have 4 groups on campus from level 100 to level 400. The students are reporting this weekend on Saturday. I think the level 100 students are reporting they will be in school for about 14 weeks or so, leave campus for another year group to come. So we are more or less going to run a shift system within this year. And it's going to be a new system we are going to run, because since the inception of teacher training colleges or
the teacher trainee allowance scrapped, and of course, is the scrapping the solution to the infrastructure deficit?
In the first place, Prinkoff members are implementers of government policies. We don't initiate, we don't make policies for government. So if at any time there's that conversation that will come up, we will, on the basis of the data that will be provided, either support or go against the decision. So I would say that we are not those to initiate that discussion. It's for government to start, and if there's a need, based on the data available, we'll support the idea. Hello?
Yes, Dr. Idrisu, you are still on.
Yes. So that is what I can say on that particular issue, because I'm only hoping that even if there is that conversation, people in authority will listen. Before the implementation of the 4-year BEd program, I must say that principals did advise the ministry and the then minister to tread cautiously, and our position was that government should defer the implementation from 2018 to 2019, so that some basic infrastructure that will take care of the numbers that will come up in the years. Because for this year, we having all 4 cohorts on campus at the same time, but that advice was not worked on. And it means that we offered the advice, but we were not given the opportunity, because we don't have the power to. I believe if the then minister had listened to the conversations that the advisor came from Prinkoff. So on the issue of the allowance, I would say that at the point the allowances were scrapped and at the point it was restored. So these are political issues. They are political matters. And then as educational managers, it doesn't lie within our purview to discuss these matters. It is up to the executive and the government of the day to start the conversation. And if there's a need, we can support based on the data, as I suggested earlier on.
Kwesi Kwarteng is still on with us. Kwesi Kwarteng, we're looking for solutions. And definitely, would government ever consider scrapping the teacher trainee allowances if all stakeholders agree to it? And will that also resolve the infrastructure deficit? Because for the past 5 years, government has done no infrastructure in colleges. So I want you to also tell me the plan on addressing the huge infrastructural deficit in these colleges.
Very well, Aisha.
So I'm asking you two questions now. One with the teacher training allowances and how
projects 1,001 out of 3,807, which 84 falls in the category of at the tertiary level, which includes that of the colleges of education. That I think I said that. Again, beyond what even Get Fund did with those abandoned projects, Get Fund had also existing projects that were at various levels of office. Even if you come to the College of Education, they were, a lot of them were using their internally generated fund, that is the ITMs, some projects. As I speak with you, I also told you about the fact that, I mean, just last week, tenders were open for the construction of at least 400 capacity halls or hostels at all the 46, all the 46 colleges of education. So I admitted that if you look at the infrastructural conversation, it's a challenge that we've had, and it's a systemic challenge that is being with us. It's not even only at the tertiary level, but it can come, I mean, at the secondary level and even at the basic level. That government, of course, the Ministry of Education, our database addressing. And so we'll continue to confront the challenges, especially by also partnering with the private sector, as we demonstrated this last November in the infrastructure forum that was held by GTEC. The whole idea was to also harness the capacity and the contributions of the private sector so that we'll be able to confront this challenge head on. Beyond that, on the question about whether or not the allowances to be scrapped, I said that, I mean, most of this conversation, like Franklin said, you know, anytime Franklin wants to patronize you, he said, I know the president is a good person, his minister is a good person, I know they are going to scrap it. I'm sure we obviously will not make decisions based on sensationalism, and of course, based on our emotions. Certainly, every decision that we make will have to be backed with science and data. I mean, you just spoke to the president of the Teacher Training Association, and his point was clear that, I mean, the allowances is something that has played a very significant role in the education. And I get it. I mean, when we speak about allowance, it shouldn't be construed or limited to probably the other half that is being paid to the student. If you look at the allowances, it's the same allowance that is also being used to feed them. So I don't know whether the conversation is about scrapping. When you talk about scrapping allowance, it's about also scrapping the allowances that is also being used to feed them. So that at the end of the day, will not be half students that are being fed at the colleges of education. And that also means, because the logic, the extension of such logic will also mean at the secondary level, probably we should also feed students, because you will also be using that money for other things. When you come to probably the basic level and even the teachers levels, probably we should also be feeding students. But at the end of the day, that those monies will also be used for other things. You see, we can have this conversation dispassionately, but as of now, government remains committed to the paying of the allowances. And of course, whilst government remains committed to the paying of the allowances, government through Get Fund, through the collaboration with the the colleges of education, and of course, harnessing the capacity and the potentials of our private sector, especially in protecting or promoting local content aspirations with our local engineers associations, even to make that admission and probably say that is a resource. Even on the positive note, at the end of the day, there's also been conversation about increasing our gross tertiary revenue to 40%. If you go all over the world, all countries that has been able to develop has hit the 40% mark. If you go to Singapore, they developed at 40%, Australia at 40%, America around 76%. If you go to South Korea, almost 96%. These are all countries that are, because their gross tertiary and rural ratio hit over 40%, they are able to develop. And so whilst we look at the other side of probably, yes, the infrastructure deficit, I mean, we should also be happy and probably pat our backs and say that, look, I mean, Ghana, probably we are on the pathway of moving our gross tertiary rural ratio from 18.8%, the current rate, to, mostly by 30%. And certainly that will not come with that ease. that is not an event. That is surely a process, and it will come with its own challenges. When those challenges, and what do we do? The Minister of Education, Honorable Dr. Oditun, is there to partner with the private sector. Of course, I mean, government is there to partner with all other stakeholders so that we'll be able to address the challenges that confront us. Yes, today we're having a conversation about so that at the end of the day, we will create that balance between infrastructure and, of course, I mean, producing also quality and, of course, I mean, the quantity of so that we're able to increase our tertiary enrollment. I'm not sure the conversation is about probably sacrificing students who genuinely deserve admission to continue their education and better their lives, and of course contribute to our socio-economic transformation at the altar of saying that there is no infrastructure. The fact that we've had a systemic problem does not mean that, I mean, we should finish solving every problem before we give students opportunity. I mean, per that would have mean that we should finish building all hospitals probably before we use national health insurance. Probably we should finish solving our all road problem before maybe we open the roads for cars to use. That is not the logic. We have to innovatively respond to the challenges that we are confronting. That is what the Minister for Education, Dr.
Mr. Kwarteng, just a quick one. It has to do with university education, and I know we are still talking about education because TEU is currently embarking on strike over failure to pay their development allowance. UTAG has also announced a strike from January. I mean, these are key.
Aisha, which of the UTAG? Aisha, because I was in the negotiation table when we agreed with the leadership of UTAG. I mean, you recall, if you look at their research component of their book and research allowance, initially it was an A amount. As I speak with you, it's over 300% increase. I'm not saying that is satisfactory, but our conversation, even beyond what we agreed, was premised on the fact that government, through the statistical service, was conducting the market premium survey. And after that, the rest of the conversation will go on. That was the entire position of the leadership of UTAG, of course, the national UTAG. Then again, we see, I think, a chapter of the UTAG who, I mean, for the purpose of this conversation, I'll fail to mention those chapters. And then at the end of the day, we are seeing another chapter, just probably a single. Of course, their concerns could be legitimate, but I mean, that's why we are there. We will listen to them and we'll address it. Recently, CETA 2 also came out with their concerns. Of course, I mean, they spoke about the disparity because now that they have also been promoted to the tertiary status, they also spoke about the disparity between their conditions of service and their friends who are lecturers. And of course, I mean, the Honorable Minister for Education said, yes, your concerns will be well addressed. We are currently sitting at the negotiation table, also talking to them. So, I mean, generally, strike action, trends of strike, conditions of service, whether or not they are good, whether or not I mean, generally, admittedly, if we are all being very fair and honest to ourselves, from Adam's time, our conditions of service as Ghanaian workers has not been good. I'm sure if you probably mention your salary that you are taking from Wikipedia, a lot of people will laugh about. Maybe in my case, a lot of people are going to say, wow, when you are just always defending and speaking every civil servant or every teacher or every lecturer. I mean, tomorrow, other issue will come that probably we need a concern or this concern somewhere, somewhere must be addressed. It will be legitimate. It's also possible that they are not legitimate. But I don't know, you give everybody a lesson here and address them. And that's what the Minister for Education has always done.
I'm grateful for your time. Kwesi Kwarteng, spokesperson for the Ministry of Education. We're also joined by Dr. Suleiman Idrisu, Vice President of Prinkoff. We'll take a break on the polls. The Ghana Health Service announced a no vaccination, no entry policy to be accompanied by mandatory vaccination in January 2022. On the first working day in the year, JoyNews checks reveals a strict enforcement of directive at government offices. Manuel Kranting has more.
I'm from Achimoda. I'm here to deliver a letter to the receptionist. When I came, they said I'm not having the card. The card is not with me. The vaccine card is not with me, so they will not allow me to go inside. But I'll be begging all around, but still. So I don't know what to do. So the only thing is I'll go back and bring it.
I actually came to the Ministry of Health for an inquiry, but then I got to see the notice that no vaccination, no entry. So I decided to step back since I've not done my vaccination yet. So I wouldn't have a card. I came from Kaswa to the Rage, as in like the Ministry of Health premises. But then due to no vaccination card, I can't enter. So I have to go back home and get vaccinated and come with the card.
So you're going to get vaccinated?
I'll get it, but like I wanted to do it because I wasn't having time to go for the shots. So, but then now I have to get it by force.
I see. So if there was a vaccination point here, you would have taken a vaccine?
Probably, but there's none here. I don't think there's any here. So.
We got here this morning and we learned that no vaccination card, you can't enter. And here's the case that some of us bought boats, Uber from far place to this side, and spending our transportation, our money from that place to this side with no benefit is really hurts. So we would like them to, bring it out to each and everyone that in case maybe you are going to an office, either Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, or any of the ministries, you go with your COVID card so that it won't be like the way ours did. We spent our transportation with no benefit.
Why didn't you bring it back?
Actually, we weren't aware of it. Yeah, if you were informed earlier, you would have come with it. We weren't aware. Yeah.
I've done the second job, so I'm okay with this. If I had the card, but I don't know why they insist that we should bring. I've been here several times. I've been here several times last year. If it's the policy this year that they've introduced, then it's up to them. Because last year when I came, in all my transactions, then they never requested for any vaccination card. If they insist.
The many people who were denied access into several public offices on Tuesday over their failure to prove their COVID-19 vaccination status. Like him, many of the affected people had no idea of the rollout of this no vaccination, no entry policy. This is in spite of an earlier announcement by the Ghana Health Service of a no vaccination, no entry policy at public places in January 2022.
I've done the second job, so I'm okay with this. If I had the card, but I don't know why they insist that we should bring. I've been here several times. I've been here several times last year. If it's the policy this year that they've introduced, then it's up to them. Because last year when I came, in all my transactions, then they never requested for any vaccination card.
There were more affected.
And here's the case that some of us bought boats, Uber from far place to this side, and spending our transportation, our money from that place to this side with no benefit is really hurts. So we would like them to, bring it out to each and everyone that in case maybe you are going to an office, either Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, or any of the ministries, you go with your COVID card.
I actually came to the Ministry of Health for an inquiry, but then I got to see the notice that no vaccination, no entry. So I decided to step back since I've not done my vaccination yet. So I wouldn't have a card. So I came from Kaswa to the Rage, as in like the Ministry of Health premises. But then due to no vaccination card, I can't enter. So I have to go back home and get vaccinated and come with the card.
From far and near, all those who failed to present vaccination cards were turned away.
I'm from Achimoda. I'm here to deliver a letter to the receptionist. When I came, they said I'm not having the card. The card is not with me. The vaccine card is not with me, so they will not allow me to go inside. But I've been begging all around, but still, so I don't know what to do. So the only thing is I'll go back and bring it.
Meanwhile, at the lorry stations, even though the directive is yet to take off, drivers are lamenting the potential economic impact of the directive on their operations. It will really disturb our operations, but the most important thing is to keep the community safe. And so, even though it will worry our sales, we will start checking it when the health service tells us to do so, and will prevent people from entering the buses. It's the general safety of the country that's important. That's what we are going to look at. Even though it's going to affect our money, we have to consider the health of the public first. And so if you don't vaccinate, you won't enter. For now, health authorities insist if you want to access any government service, you must first get vaccinated and show proof of same. For JoyNews, my name is Manuel Kranting.
President of the Ghana Journalists Association, Roland Afilmoni, says it is important for journalists to specialize in the various fields to help improve the quality of their reporting. Speaking to JoyNews on the sidelines of GJA UNESCO training program for selected journalists on migration, he said the training will help selected newsrooms to set up migration desk.
The program is basically to draw up guidelines and look at the possibility of establishing migration desks in selected media houses, because migration is such a complex issue which has been subjected to misreporting, and there's a need for the media to be so capacitated so that they will lead the way in reporting factually, accurately, reporting in such a manner as to help address the monumental issues migration poses. Migration has its negative and positive sides, but most often we dwell on the negative, and the stories we do are mostly rooted in stereotyping. So this program or meeting has brought together key people in the media, people with intellectual power and professional solidity, who look at how best to craft the necessary guidelines so that journalists will not stray into areas which do not portray that the positivity or negativity as far as migration is concerned.
One of the facilitators for the program, Dr. Kweku Roxon, says it is important for journalists to have a good understanding of the issues about migration.
Migration is a specialized area, so it calls for people who have a very good understanding of the matters. All we have done is that we have always been taking very small aspects of it and then just blowing it up. For instance, you can have migration issues coming up during elections because of suspicions on the part of one party or the other that one party may bring in migrants from another country, immigrants from another country, and another party to believe that, yes, I mean, you cannot talk about that because it means then that you also you're not pro getting people within the ECOWAS sub-regime to be part of the whole or to live in your country. So in a case, this is just an example of how people have treated the matter of migration. Migration also, to some people, is seen as basically a question of all these young boys and girls who you see around Accra Mall and other areas, streets begging. So they see them as a nuisance, that these are people who are virtually dependent on the raw work of people in Ghana, men and women in Ghana. So those are some of the ways in which we look at migration. But migration too can also be seen from an international perspective, not just from an African perspective, because now we're seeing economic immigrants from China, and we're seeing economic migrants too from some countries in Europe. All that they are coming to do is because they're coming here because they feel that this is an opportunity for them to get a bit of what is going on as far as our oil fields discoveries are concerned. Yeah.
The Ghana Union of Traders Association is warning prices of goods will increase significantly if government reverses the reduction of values of selected items. According to the association, the benchmark value was the only straw businesses were holding on to. The warning follows a statement issued by the Ghana Revenue Authority, which announced that effective today, January 4, benchmark values will be reversed for some 43 selected items. The reversal will affect the selected items from all the three categories on which it was applied. First Vice Chairman of GUTA, Clement Boateng, in an interview with Israeli on the AM show, warned the implementation is not a good move.
We are not against the industrialization agenda of the government, but what we are telling the government to do is to hasten slowly. Currently, we all know that our industries don't have the capacity, to meet the demands of the Ghanaians. And so, therefore, we want the government to hasten slowly. At least, we should all come to, a round table discussion and then look at the areas that they can be able, to meet the local demand. We can maybe take about 1, 2, 3 items. Then we pilot on that. You see, but to bandit about 42 items and say that you are reversing the policy is very inimical, to business. That is the point that we are making. We are not against, the industrialization agenda of the government, because we know that at least we must start from somewhere and then progress gradually until we are self-sufficient. But we could all bear reverse that currently the situation that we are, our local manufacturers cannot meet the country's demand. And so therefore, if you say you are banded about 42 items and then reversing the policy, my brother, it is inimical to business. And let me tell you, government currently, we are having a double-digit inflation. Is it not it? And government's aim is to try as much as possible to achieve a single digit. Now, with the reversal of this policy, I can tell you it is going to be difficult for government to achieve its single-digit inflation because prices are going to rise. Prices are going to rise. You bear with me that this Christmas, people were saying that prices are too high, and therefore traders were complaining that their goods, were not being, patronized. It were not being patronized because, one, currently the situation that we find ourselves is very difficult. Prices of freight have gone up astronomically. World commodity prices have gone up. Our city also, is not performing, as it's used to be. So, coupled with all these facts, made prices, higher. And with the reversal of this policy, prices are going, to be maybe 2 or 3-fold.
Economist at the University of Ghana, Lord Mensah, has been explaining reasons which might be accounting for the implementation at this time of the year.
The government had an objective for introducing these subsidies, or let me call it a cut in tariffs. And these objectives, one of them is to probably increase more imports. And then secondly, the imports must be targeted towards maybe goods that are coming to serve as probably an input to the economic activities of this country. And then also, you look at the local manufacturer side. I mean, you realize that anytime, you reduce tariffs, it encourages more import. And if you encourage more import, what is going to happen is that prices on the market has a tendency of, coming down. And when price comes down, the local manufacturers probably may not be able to afford to produce at that lower price, and therefore knocking them off business. And that is why you see that conflict between the two parties that you mentioned earlier. And so this is, bound to happen in every environment where, you allow imports to come and compete with local manufacturing, product. Now let's look at how the government made the U-turn. And I will always say that, some of the policies that are being rolled out by government are normally politically motivated than economic.
Okay.
Because,
explain.
In 2019, at the time that this policy was being introduced, government, desperation for revenue generation was there. It was clearly on the grounds that, okay, fine, we had borrowed up to a point where we need money. So I did not support this idea of, discounting import.
Yeah.
Exactly. I did not support, not necessarily the reversal, but then reducing the import as of that time in 2019.
Yeah.
I wasn't in favor of it because, when you whet the appetite of the importer after a certain time and you want to remove it, it becomes a problem because it gives that kind of laxity into the local system to which, the effort that we need to move towards production would tend to be reducing. So at a point in time where you have some way, somehow, production capacity and you want to reduce it, people's appetite have already been developed in importation. And as a result of that, you will start getting this conflict.
We take a break on the pulse. We'll make way for sports. So we draw the curtains on the pulse this afternoon. My name is Aisha Ibrahim. Many thanks for watching. Up next is Let's Talk Showbiz. Do enjoy the rest of our programs.